All right. Can everybody hear me? Let's make sure I'm on the right preamp here. Hello, hello. So it's coming in good. All right. Well, we got lots of cool questions today. And special sneak peek, we got the first Vertex Boost serial number 1 ready to go. These will be out in a couple of weeks, but this is the very first one. And as you can see on the back, it's got an 1/8" jack instead of the 1/4". Like here's the original Boost, right? And it's got a 1/4" for the expression. And so in order to fit it in this smaller compartment here, we went with an 1/8" jack. And there's plenty of insert cables and TRS cables that go 1/8" to 1/4", so that's really no big deal. But it's smaller, as you can see. And I actually think in the loose polling we've done so far, people prefer the look of this in this format than the other one. So I'm stoked about that. That's pretty cool. So really excited to get this guy out there. It's going to be $199. It has a double buffer, so it has an input buffer when you come in, and then there's a buffer on the expression return. So you can also use this as an insert. So you actually put other pedals inside of this as an insert, and then have the boost, follow those. So it actually has 2 buffers in it, so you can use it as an input-output buffer for a system. You can also use this to turn a passive effects loop into an active effects loop. So you can put your send and return into the back of it, and then you can use the 1/8" out for an insert to go to your effects, and this will turn your passive effects loop into an active effects loop. This can also just work in series in the effects loop if you want it to act as a volume control or a boost in your effects loop. It can work in front of the amp. It really does a lot of cool things. I'll take you through some of the different setup options in a minute. Also wanted to give an update to people about our buffer interfaces that fit into the legs of our pedal boards. I just got this back from Fixed Pedalboards, and just to show the fit, and everything is looking great. It has all the jacks that we're going to need. It's got our toggle switch over here so that we can adjust the polarity of the transformer isolated out. And so like this will be on the inside of the pedal board, so you have your DC and all your connections here. And then the outside, this is what would face the outside. And this is basically just going to replace one of the legs of our existing pedal board. So you can kind of just have it sitting, inside your pedal board, routing out to whatever you need to route out to. This is pretty cool. I'm excited about getting this guy going. And we'll also have a standalone version that doesn't mount into any sort of leg at all for those people that want to just use it as a standalone thing. So really stoked about that. I've got a lot of questions coming in. So we'll take those and see what happens. So first question is, make this a little smaller. Okay, are the pedals in amps effects loops buffered? I'm using either a Mesa Boogie high wire or a TC Electronic Polytune 3 and a Bonafide buffers for the drive and tone pedals. Okay, you're not using them for that, but you're using them in that part. So, the high wire is all you would need in terms of buffers for the front of the amplifier. You wouldn't need the Bonafide buffer if it's in front of the amp, unless you're running stereo or something like that. Then you could use another output buffer. But if you're using it all in mono in front of the amp, then you don't need the Bonafide buffer. You would just use the high wire. But effects loops, some are buffered, some are not. It depends on the effects loop. Most, I'd say, are passive. And so you need something in order to turn them into an active effects loop if you want to have no signal loss in them. And so that's why something like this could work, if you connect it properly, and I'll show you a diagram of kind of how that looks. Also the clinulator, which I've been talking about a lot. We have a video called Dumble's Biggest Mistake, and we talk about, that he had passive effects loops. So you could check that one out, and that would be a good place to see, a device that can turn a passive loop into an active loop, and it gives you controls for the send and return level. So it's not the same thing. The main reason why it's not the same thing is that the Mesa Boogie doesn't have any ability to control the output level, because the output that's coming from the send typically is line level. So it is much hotter. You know, it's coming out at +3 or +4 or +5. And most of these guitar pedals are -20. So it's significantly hotter and it will clip them. And so that's why you have to have a volume control on them that goes below unity gain, because you need to be able to attenuate that output from the send so that it doesn't clip the pedal. And that's why on all those clineulators and stuff like that, it has that send control, so you can adjust that, and then you can make up any gain loss on the output with the return control. Yeah, so if you're doing it, Mike, so this is a continuation, so I'm sorry I didn't read the second part of that. So if you're just running 4-cable method, so really the places that you would need the buffer is you use the high wire in front of the amp. For the effects loop, if it's a passive loop, I recommend getting the clinulator, and I mean, like, this will work in the effects loop and it will help. But if you have effects that are instrument level, this isn't going to help you, because this only goes down to unity gain. This is only unity gain when it's at off, you know, so it doesn't go silent. And that's why the clinulator is so handy, in that it goes below unity gain, and so you can get stuff to work at instrument or line. It doesn't matter. So that's why I would check out the clinulator if I were you. I think that's a great product for this. I have an established signal chain, including some changes suggested by Mason that were a bit counterproductive to me. As I replace some of those pedals, what types of things do I need to be aware of? Okay. So as you replace some of these pedals, what are the type of things that you need to be aware of? Well, I mean, I would say that typically, if you have pedals that are true bypass and you're replacing them with buffered pedals, sometimes there can be some sonic difference there. If you are replacing something that is a really high impedance sensitive pedal, like let's say you're putting in a vintage fuzz face in place of something that was formerly not sensitive to any sort of buffering on the input. If you have any buffers, that would be something that then would be a problem, because the fuzz face won't like the buffers. So there's a lot of different variables that could be introduced by pedals inadvertently, not realizing that either they were sensitive to that position in the signal path, or secondly, that you were adding an additional buffer that, you know, if it's a bad one, it could create noise, or it could create other sensitivities downstream. These are all considerations. But I'd say in normal circumstances, if you're substituting the same type of pedal for the same type of pedal, they're both, you know, the same type of bypass, I think that you should be fine. I don't think there should be any consequence to doing one over the other. So that's one thing to be considered of. Also, will differing internal components change where they should be in relationship to each other? Well, the stacking of the pedals, in particular with overdrives, it doesn't matter unless you plan to stack them. It doesn't matter what goes after one another if you're not going to stack them together. If you're just using these as standalone pedals, then I would say there's not going to be much of a concern. You could put really anything anywhere. And so I don't think internal stuff is going to have any real difference. Excuse me. I had to get out that yawn. We'll see if it's contagious if anybody else yawns here. Apparently there's like some sort of like scientific experiment about like when other people see people yawn, it like triggers it in other people. So in any case, I don't think that there's anything circuit-wise that's going to be a problem for you other than the buffers. And I think as far as internal components, so long as it's staying in the same sort of realm, if it's buffered, you're keeping it buffered, or you're going to true bypass, or you're going from buffer to true bypass, you might know some differences in that, but I don't think it's going to be significant. All right, I'm going to attempt your name. So is your name pronounced Xochiwa? Correct me on that one. I want to make sure I start getting your name properly, because I've been avoiding it. I saw the clean cables video. Thanks for the DIY tips. Could you please suggest how to wire an RJM PBC10 to my pedals? You decided to do your first pedal board. Okay. So, I mean, really the tips that you saw there are going to be the same tips that I would recommend doing for this, especially for power. The power thing can stay the same, right? Because you're still leading all of your pedals into one power supply. And if you think about that technique, you're leading all the pedals into one power supply. It's a very similar technique if you're leading all the pedals into the switcher. You just have a lot more cables. So you're going to follow pretty much the same technique, except what I like to do for the RJM switchers is I like to make all of the straight cables that go into the back of the RJM first. So this is all the ones, and you see an RJM. Let's just pull it up so we can be really explicit here. RJM PBC10. All right, bringing it up on the screen here. All right, so you see all the connections here, right? You got a bunch of them. So this is where you want to use a straight plug of some kind. So ordinarily for our rigs, we're using SPS4 with the Mogami 2314. So what you're going to do is you're going to be inserting all of those 1/4 inch, or you're going to solder one side. So basically, depending on the size, usually the cables are somewhere around maybe 3 feet, 3.5 feet. I'll make them all the same length. Because the cost of the cable for this sort of stuff is pretty negligible. Like, you know, the cost to get, let me get out of this thing here. The cost to buy Mogami 2314, it's, you know, 50 cents a foot or something like that. I'll usually make 3 feet or 3.5 feet for everyone, depending on the size of the pedal board. I'll solder the straight end first, and I'll populate the entire back row, or the entire row of plugs on the back of the RJM. So every single plug that I'm going to need is terminated into the jack. And then I'll take blue painter's tape and I'll write the name of what it is. So send 1, return 1, send 2, return 2. I do that across the board. And then I will route them to the pedals, you know, and not terminate the other side yet. And so I route them to where they need to be. I don't cut them yet. I leave them long. And then once I have them routed to everything that I need, and there's a lot of extra cable hanging off, but I've labeled what it is, then I will cut them down to length. And I'll actually put the jack, like the part that I need to solder into the jack, I'll put the plug into the jack. I'll take off the back so the internal part of it is exposed. And I'll line the cable up so I know exactly how I want it to fit. I cut it, and then I strip it, and then I solder it, and then I've got a perfectly cut cable every time. And I mark the back of the plugs each time, so it's very important with a switcher because there's so many cables. I always use a label maker, and I label all the plugs, what they go to. So send 1, send 2. You know, when I cut and terminate the other side, I do the same thing. I label it send 1, send 2. So I always know where it's going to, because if you start unplugging stuff, it's going to be hard to remember what goes where. So, all right, that's right. I pronounced it properly. Good. Um, oh, cool. Got a little history. So, Chihuahua. Very cool. And Mace Mejia sends you his welcomes. Again, the new Boost. Very cool looking. I think that the paint job on this one is even actually like, it's like a better, we've upgraded our paint apparently between this one and this one. This paint looks really nice, and it just feels really solid. I like that we went with a full-size knob here. It feels really good. I'm really happy with how this turned out. So cool. So let's see. Mejia gave me a nice outline today that we're gonna be wrapping on. So Chihuahua, not yet. So you guys are the first people to see this. So nobody else has even seen this. I haven't posted about this on social media. This is top secret. This is part of the benefits of being on Patreon. You get to see about this stuff early. You will also be among the first that are able to pre-order this, just like with the Steel String Supreme. So I'll let you know when we have these ready for you to order. But it'll probably be a couple of weeks, I think, before that'll happen. So I'll let you know. So we're going to talk about what makes a good boost. And, obviously we have one type of boost here, but there's lots of different types of boost. There's treble boosters, one that I like a lot. If you're into the whole treble booster thing, these BSM pedals are crazy good. And they make like every treble booster under the sun. Some people make fun of us because they say, oh, you only make pedals that sound like Dumbles. Well, if we're guilty of this guy is guilty of making every single treble booster. He's got like literally 50 treble boosters on his website for every single imaginable possible thing from different eras, from different players. But they sound really great. These are another example of a different type of boost. This is not transparent at all. It adds a ton of high end. It also is transistor based, so it's sensitive to impedance. You can't put a buffer in front of this. This is another example. You also have things like the RC booster, like the EP booster. These are really colorful boosts that you can adjust the EQ on, at least on the RC booster. And on the EP booster, it's kind of like a mid-range boost that's made to emulate what's inside of an Echoplex preamp. So these are all these different types of boosts. And I think that the way that I think about most of my rigs, like if I had an infinite amount of space to build a rig, I really like to have two. I like to have a pre-gain boost, which is one that's early in the chain, which the intent is to overdrive other circuits and add more saturation to it. And then have another one at the end, and I almost always use the Vertex boost, because it has more output and it will push either the amp harder or it will add more volume to the existing sounds that I have. So it'll just add more volume. And of course, the cool thing about the Vertex Boost is you have that expression out so you can connect your volume pedal to it. And you can use that as a way to either add or subtract more volume. And then you turn on the boost. And now the volume pedal is now going to go up to however much dB you've set over unity gain for it to boost on top of. So this is really, really helpful as sort of a finishing tool to make sure that you're adding more output in the right way and you're able to control it, where you can't do that so much with a more colorful boost like a RC booster or an EP booster or one of these treble type boosters. Now I don't usually use these because they're just too sensitive. They're not that friendly on a pedal board. You have to get rid of your buffers on the input, at least if you're going to use that. So I typically stay away from them. But if I'm thinking about sort of a round table of like my favorite boosts that are out there that I think do a really good job, certainly amongst like the transparent clean boosts, the Vertex boost is my favorite. But I really think, honestly, and even though it's not that cool of a suggestion, I really think the RC booster is a great early on boost. Like it's got plenty of EQ controls. I mean, it's evolved a little bit. Let's look at the RC booster. I think now it has a double foot control on it, so you can get like 2 different settings out of it. Look at this thing. All right. Yeah, look at this. The RC booster now has 2 foot switches, so you have 2 different gain controls on it. So you can have one that's a higher gain and a lower gain. Although I'm surprised they did that, because I would almost think the volume would be more valuable than that to me. But this is a really good pedal, and I think it sounds really good. I think it's well built. They always do a good job with this stuff, and I think that if I had to choose a first and early on gain stage, this would definitely be a top contender for me. And then using something really transparent at the end as sort of a volume boost, kind of a finishing tool that adds more output but doesn't change the core tone. And of course the Vertex Boost is a great tool for that. And Jacob says, what's the story behind the Rangemaster treble booster? I don't know a lot about the story in terms of like how it was invented, but it's what this is. This is basically a Rangemaster clone. So it's just adding, a boost to the signal, adds treble. These are really popular with older Marshalls or older Voxes. Guys like Brian May, Jimmy Page, all use these to get gain out of these higher headroom, high wattage Marshalls and Voxes, because they couldn't get them to break up naturally without turning them way up. So by, kind of goosing the front end with something like this and cranking it with 16 or 18 decibels of volume into the preamp section, you get it to distort earlier. And so this is kind of why these became more popular, is that it allowed people to get more overdrive out of the amplifier without having to go louder. Just clip the front end by slamming it in the front end. So that's the thing about range masters. Now, as far as how it was invented and the circuitry and stuff like that, I don't know very much about it. I mean, I know a lot of the earlier users, and I know that I'm pretty sure that it was invented in the UK. I don't think it was an American product. And that's kind of the extent to which I know. I'm not a huge like range master aficionado, but I always like to have one. I had a replica of like the original kind of range master box, but I never used it, so I sold it to somebody who wanted it. But they are very cool. I mean, they sound great into a vintage Marshall. I mean, you get it right away, or into an AC30, you get it. It's very specific. David A says, "Did you buy a parka?" I haven't. I don't have a parka. I have some. I'm gonna have to go to REI though this afternoon. The reason why he's asking is that I'm gonna be in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Chicago next week, and apparently they're gonna have minus temperatures or in the evenings or in the early mornings, and this California boy is not used to that. So I might have to wear either just a crazy amount of layers. I mean, I don't know that I'll be outside that much, honestly, since I think most things are closed. But but still, apparently it's going to be really cold. And so I need to start packing because our flight leaves tomorrow at 1. Get a direct flight to Chicago and see see what that negative temperature feels like. I have to go buy some gloves, though. I realize that I only have like ski gloves, so I'm gonna head to REI and see what they have. They don't usually have really cold weather stuff there, because it just, the coldest it's been here in like 30 years, or in this city in Oakland. I think it's like 30, 31 or something. That was the coldest it ever has been. So just 1 degree below freezing, but nothing below 0. So. Mason Mejia says, "I think the RC Booster is the shiniest pedal on the market." So top marks for that. I do like the white look better. I don't like shiny pedals. Could be weird if they're too shiny to see on a pedal board. But you know what? I mean, I wouldn't prevent it from. If I really like the pedal, it wouldn't stop me from buying it. Let's talk about. I'm looking at some of Mejia's notes here Mejia pointed out with the Echoplex that guys like Eddie Van Halen, would use the Echoplex in the signal path, whether they had delay or not, because they liked what that mid-range imparted to the sound. I also think that part of that has to do with, like he was cascading 2 Marshalls, one into the next, so he had his first Marshall basically used as a glorified distortion pedal that he would slave out into the input of the second one. So he would use the first one as sort of the pre-volume, like the gain, and then the secondary amp would be the master volume. And I think that he liked how the Echoplex kind of tightened that stuff up. But he also, if you look at any of his old rigs, or even the ones that were on like they had a Met, I think, like a New York museum display of all of his original stuff and pictures of how he used it. I mean, he always had a big giant graphic EQ, and I actually have one out in the garage that's like a 12-band EQ, and he was always like EQing the crap out of his stuff because he had all the mid-range from the Echoplex that was coming in, and then he would kind of scoop out a little bit in the first amp to kind of get it to kind of where he liked it. And so he was pretty heavily processing his distortion sound, like, because no Marshall could do that back then. They didn't have that much gain in whatever it was. What year was the first Van Halen record come out? 78? Something like that. So, I mean, like, they just didn't have gain like that in Marshall. So that was the only way you could produce it. You were using the Echoplex to add more mid-range. You were slaving one Marshall on the other so you could get distortion out of those amps, which don't really distort that easily. Despite what people think about Marshalls, they're not really, especially the older Plexis, they're not high gain. It's like Marshall's equivalent of a twin reverb. So I think they have a place, but most people who are buying Echoplexes, they just think, oh, it's going to make my rig sound better. They're buying those Echoplex preamps because they think it's like it's a sound that's going to make it sound more like Van Halen or some other record. But the reality is that there's like other stuff that's just going on with like those repeats and running through tape. You know, I think that there's that's more of the sound, I think, than just the mid-range boost. But that's just my take. But maybe one of you guys has an EP booster and you just love it. So, anything else that's on people's minds about boosts? We can talk about transparent boosts. What are some of your favorite boosts? There's only a couple of us watching right now, so we can really go wild on the boost train. I'm trying to think of any other cool boosts I have. Oh, this is a cool one. This guy was like super old school. Demeter, James Demeter. He's in LA, and he this thing, the Fat Control. This used to be installed in a lot of Valley Arts guitars and a lot of Jim Tyler guitars. They would take the boost, this is kind of like a mid-range boost, and they would take this out and put this preamp into guitars, and they would use it as like a blender pot. So you'd see like some of these old Valley Arts guitars, they have like all these switches and stuff like that. Let's see if we can find one. Who's got a Valley Arts? They were pretty cool. If anybody's in the market for a Valley Arts, here you go. Here's a Lukather one. $5,000. Maybe go talk to David A. over at Chicago Music Exchange. He can make you a deal. So on these, this is an example of a Valley Arts. This is one of the Lukather models with EMGs. But a lot of these guys would just install these preamps in those guitars. Some of them would have switches, but some of them would just be on all the time, you know, and they would just be acting as like basically their active preamp to the EMGs, or the EMGs kind of had something similar to this that would come inside the guitars. But these were like all the rage back in these types of guitars. You'd put in these different, you know, buffers that were built inside, and maybe there would be a boost switch or a boost control that you could blend in to get more output. But this was a really cool one for like that 80s LA sound. And then this is just it put into a pedal, but James Demeter still made it. Those are really actually pretty cool pedals. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really cool here in the boost realm that's worth mentioning. I don't see anything that cool for the boost thing. But I think that kind of, I mean, that's kind of what you got. You got your treble boost. You got your mid boost with the EP. You know, the treble boost is like the classic kind of Rangemaster type thing. You got your transparent boost, which is like the Vertex boost. You got kind of your boosts that have all sorts of tone controls. This could be like the Jackson Audio Prism. This could be the RC Booster. And then, I mean, another really underrated boost, frankly, is the Boss GE7, or really any EQ, graphic EQ pedal. I mean, if you think about it, it's sort of the ultimate booster in that you can be whatever you want it to be. You boost a few frequencies, you cut a few frequencies, you can get it wherever you want it to be, and you can be very surgical with the type of boost you want. You can emulate a treble boost, you can emulate a bass boost, you can emulate a mid-range boost. You have any type of boost you want. You just set it up as you need, and you got a level control independently of that. So that's probably the most underrated boost out there. So if you're thinking about how do you get all the types of boosts in one, maybe just go get yourself a Boss GE7, you know, and the really hip ones that I'm liking that all the cool kids are into are the ones that Exactone is modifying, which basically I bought one just to kind of see what they were doing. And it looks like they did like the Monty Allams mod and then shifted the frequency range down to something that was more guitar friendly. So this is what they do. Oh, excuse me. And they have a cool little video here of Tim Pierce talking about it. But this is a great pedal. You know, they did a really good job, because the truth is that with guitar stuff, and I lost my camera here. With guitar stuff, most of the speakers don't produce any frequencies above 5K. So you can see it, they've shifted everything down. So the highest is 4K. And then it goes down to 400 hertz. So you have kind of you're really more surgical in the mid range, and then you have a little bit of the treble and kind of getting into the presence range. But it's all very guitar specific. So I think that this is a really cool pedal. I say, this if you just needed one, if you weren't willing to go with more than one, this may not be quite as transparent as ours. It doesn't have the cool expression option where you can use this to add in more pedals or use a volume pedal or whatever. But I think if as far as a utility product, I think that this checks a lot of boxes, and even in the unmodded ones are decent. They're just a little noisy. They can be a little noisy. So all food for thought there, but whatever people are thinking. David A uses an Archer Klon for a while as a boost. I think that they're great. I would definitely consider that more of an earlier on product to use to saturate like other stuff. Because even when I did this interview with Mark Karen on our podcast, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and he was one of the original guys that was going around to the trade shows and demoing those products, for Bill Finnegan. And Bill would tell him like, yeah, it's really not like a great overdrive. It's really more of a great kind of like low gain booster. And so he would tell people not to turn the gain control beyond the LED. Do I have my Klon in here? No, I guess I put it back. Yeah, so you would just, if you look on the Klon, let's just bring one up. Again, if you need a good deal on a Klon, talk to David A. I don't see it. Maybe Josh Scott's is no longer on there for 500,000. Looks like they're going for $3,500. You get a 2-rock or a Klon. So basically, he would tell them, you see where the gain control is, and there's an LED right off. He would tell them to point the gain control at the LED, and that was kind of roughly the amount of gain that was sort of the sweet spot, and then treble and output to taste. And so even the original maker of it didn't really envision it being used as a distortion or an overdrive device. So I think that this is interesting to see what the interpretation was of the maker. I don't think it's not my favorite overdrive, but I use the Archer II on my board because I like setting it pretty low and kind of using it just to add a little low mid, push to everything. Are Cornish pedals worth the price? Well, I try to stay out of like, is it worth it? Because I think that could be, it's so subjective. Is it worth it to who? If you make $1 million, what is it to you to spend a few $100 more on a pedal? The thing I would say about Pete Cornish pedals, having a more experience with them, is that a lot of them are mods. So they're taking Boss pedals and they're doing his thing to them. So like the Tape Echo Simulator, you have to provide a DD2, a Boss DD2. And then he takes the chip out of it and does different things to the analog section, on both sides of the ADA conversion. And then he adds in a modulation circuit and, some other things. But it's still at its core a Boss pedal. Same with the chorus, at its core a Boss pedal. I think the flanger and the chorus are both like that. They're based on Boss circuits that he puts in there and then kind of creates a modification around them. And that's not to say that he doesn't have an opinion or a point of view that's worth listening to. I think he does. But I think that also like in his more original stuff, the fuzz type stuff, like the tone benders and like I think he calls them a soft sustain, and the other one is the big muffs. I mean, they're pretty classical versions. You know what I mean? They're in his box and built his way. But they're still, at the end of the day, those things. And I think that's all fine and good. I think that the quality is very good. But I think it's one of those things where he's kind of like a legacy guy. He's worked with Cornish has worked with David Gilmour, and he's worked with Andy Summers. And he was kind of like the game in town if you were in England. It was like him and Roger Mayer. But Roger Mayer was kind of not not as into the system stuff as him. But there's a lot of stuff that Pete Cornish says that I think are just wrong. You know, like his whole opinion about buffers and his buffer approach, I don't agree with. His cable systems, and when he talks about, you know, his cables, all that's BS. You know, where it's a single-ended system. There's no such thing as semi-balanced. That's not my opinion. That's scientific fact. So there's just sort of stuff where he gets a little into the weeds and the hocus pocus, but I mean, he's not unique in that, and certainly a lot of companies, you know, do a similar thing. I mean, Evidence Audio tells people they need to break in their cables for 40 hours and run signal through them so that the ions can settle, and that's just like, I mean, that's flat Earth conspiracy right there. It's just way out there. So I don't think he's unique in that, but you know, I think that some of them are cool. I think that they sound good. I don't feel compelled. Like if I wanted a Cornish tape echo simulator, well, you can just go buy an actual tape echo from, you know, you can buy an EP3 for the same price. So why not just get the thing that it's simulating, you know? And so that's kind of my attitude, is just get the real thing. Just get the real thing. Because you know, I think that they're like more than $2,000. You know, you can get almost any condition. You can get a great condition Echoplex for that. So that's kind of my view on it. Yes, happy Thursday. Can't wait to get the new Boost. Yeah, I know this is not doing it justice. It actually looks really cool, and it's so small. You know, it just feels like it's just like a little pedal. It does all the things the original one does. It's just smaller. It just feels great. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Not just the sound. I mean, it sounds the same, but the look, I think it looks better. I don't think we can do this with our other pedals because, you know, like the knobs would be in the way for ones that have more knobs. But for the single knob stuff, that's a good look. So anybody want to talk about boosts? I mean, David A has said he likes his Archer. Who refuses to use a boost? There's a lot of guys that think boosts are wastes. Like there's no reason to have a boost. Just turn up your guitar volume. Anybody in that camp? The anti-boosters? Or what about pedalboards? I know that I hope I'm not outing David here, but David A is working on his rig this week. He's got his cool Vertex pedalboard. Mejia says he uses the Nile preamp as a boost before drives. I think that's a good place to use it. The old Nile. I think I should do a video about our most underrated pedal, which frankly I think is the Tone Secret. I was playing it just earlier today, and I just think it sounds really good as just sort of like an all-around, like always-on type thing. I feel like I need to do a video about why people should buy the Tone Secret, because it's not getting any love. It's not getting any love. We need David A to promote it over at Chicago Music Exchange. It's such a cool pedal though. Like it's sort of like the best version of a tube screamer that I can think of. Like in terms of what it does. Like there's certainly better standalone tube screamers, but you have to have the right amp to make a tube screamer work. If you have the wrong amp, then it's just too much mid. So you have to be able to pull out mids, and you got to be going into like kind of like a Fendery amp, you know. And so if you got a Vox, even if you can pull out the mids, you're still kind of like not in the right zone. So maybe that's a possible future video. Did anybody check out this week's video on cable management? I know some people here had been asking about it, but I'm curious if it met the mark in terms of delivering on what people were wanting to see in terms of like what those techniques actually are. We'll bring it up. So yeah, it's the clean cabling video. Pro rig builders don't want you to know this secret. And it's basically just teaching you the technique so that you get really nice clean lines whenever you're building your pedal board. And we pretty much laid it out, I mean, as closely as I could, as far as here's what you do first, second, third, you know, this is how you get the look. I mean, it's pretty simple, and I think you know, we were talking a little earlier about this, but you know, whether you're using a power supply or a switcher or whatever, it pretty much holds true, you know, across the board. You can pretty much apply those rules to anything that's going to be happening, and you can get a pretty good, clean result each time. So if you didn't get a chance to watch it, check it out. I think it's not very long. It's a shorter video. It's maybe 12 minutes, and I think even after 5 minutes, you'll have the gist of it. Oh yeah, because David, you're gonna need all those tips when you're building your rig this weekend. So it's definitely a good thing to have. Anything else on people's minds? Should we just do a shredathon? I got my telly here. We'll just shred all day. David A says that buffer video though was insane. Seeing the loss with and without the buffer using 30 feet of cable. Yeah. That video didn't do poorly, but it just kind of, I mean, I think it did like 12,000 or something like that, which like the video today I think is already at 12,000. And so I think like the fringe things like that maybe like regular people don't want to know about, but I think it was important even for us, you know, because I really want to know, like, are we using a cable that's even in sort of the realm of that? And I think I mentioned last week that the lava cable that a lot of guys chose, like, and Mejia can attest to this, that sounded like dog crap in the studio. It didn't sound that good, and it had a lot of loss. But I think that like when people are listening to him in isolation, and they're not, I don't know how closely they're listening to him back to back to back, but that cable was like 5 or 6 dB lower than everything else. So it definitely rolled off a lot. When you put the buffer in, it restored a lot of it. But I would say it was actually very unpleasing to me. It sounded really dark. I thought it was not that good. And the Mogami kind of was very close, within a few, you know, I think it was like 0.3 difference, you know, so not even a 1 vote difference. So I thought they were great. And the cool thing is that now, you know, Reverb is kind of changing their policies around the stores, which kind of came at a perfect time for us, because now we sell all of the pre-made cables, you know, so if anybody doesn't want to build their rig, we got all that stuff now. So you can actually you can order 2314, which was like the, you know, that and the Lava were the 2 highest rated patch cables, and you can select, you know, whether you want, you know, a square to straight or a straight to straight or whatever it is that you want. You can get them in packs of 3. You can drop down your size, and we're actually going to have even custom options here, so you can really get any size you want of patch cables. And of course, we have our input cables. We're selling. Oh, this is cool. I should tell you guys about this. Although this shows dual lock, which we'll have to eliminate. We have our own version now of it that's actually, which we're calling Super Lock, which is basically a dual lock derivative, and it's kind of a hybrid between the SJ3551 and the SJ3550. And so part of the reason that we did those offsets between the two is because if you wanted to get the kind of the best stick, you kind of had to get 2 mismatched types of Velcro. This one, the pattern is already variegated, so it's like changing everywhere, or varied between each one of the like little mushrooms on there. And so you don't need to have two different types. You can just use one type. And so for me, this ended up being a simpler solution. The other thing that this is addressing that is kind of a trick or a problem with 3M is that 3M will leave a lot of residue when you pull it off of a surface. And this has a different adhesive backing. So it doesn't have that same issue with pulling off and having all this residue. And I would say the staying power is roughly the same. I haven't been able to distinguish any difference, but I've built the last few rigs using this over the last couple of months, and I've been really, really happy with it. And that's kind of why we've kind of taken it on and have put this in our store instead of the dual lock, because it really works great. And we'll remove that dual lock. And pricing wise, this should be very competitive. It should be less, equal or less than the dual lock. So we have a bunch of these products that are on therigdr.com. So again, I'll take you there one more time. If you do want to check it out, we're just kind of selling some of the basic stuff, the zip ties, the tie down mounts. You can actually buy them in a bundle in the Tone Essentials kit, which you can buy based on the number of pedals that you have. So we've kind of pre-arranged them in the size, so you can get that there, and all this will be shipped directly to your house. So if you do need some of that stuff, do check that out. But also we have free cable tutorials that show you how to make these exact same cables. So if you're handy with a soldering iron, you can do it all yourself. And we give you all the resources, all of the tricks of the trade, locations where you can buy all this stuff, so you know exactly where to get it. So that's cool. And Mejia validated the lava cables sucked. Well, I wouldn't say they sucked. It was just like there was quite a bit of difference between those and everything else. I thought again, but once the buffer was involved, it was like they were all pretty negligible. And just again, for anybody that's coming in here late, I was showing off the new Vertex Boost MKII in its smaller box. I was also showing off the buffer prototype that now we've got one that's powder coated. This is basically going to replace a leg in any of the existing Vertex pedal boards. And so, it'll come complete with the size leg that you have, so whatever size pedal board you have, we'll make you a new leg and we'll mount it into this, but you could actually detach this piece if you wanted. And it'll have everything. It'll have an input, dual output buffer, so you have stereo outputs on these two sides, and eventually we'll have it all silk screen so you know what it is. And it has a audition loop, or you could use that audition loop as an insert, or you could use that for 4-cable method. So this can literally do everything. It can do mono setups, it can do 4-cable method setups, it can do stereo setups, it can do stereo effects loops, it can do wet, dry, wet. There's really nothing that this thing can't do. So, it really is doing everything. And then we have a little toggle switch here for the polarity. And then, you have the reciprocal jacks on the side and then a 9-volt in. So this is like super compact. If it's on, a leg on your pedal board, you're wiring everything into this thing. This is going to be a good solution for a lot of people. And again, they'll be able to be retrofitted to any one of the boards that are out there that we make. So heads up on that. That's probably a little, maybe a month or two away, but we're getting closer. I'm really excited for this one. So anything else that's on people's minds? Anybody have some big Super Bowl plans? I guess nobody's really, most people aren't getting together in big crowds. I think I'll be driving to Fort Wayne, Indiana that night. Any pedal board things, any boost things on people's minds? Well, if there isn't anything that's on people's minds, I will get back to packing. As I said earlier, I'm heading to flying to Chicago tomorrow, and I'm gonna have to go to REI, maybe buy some gloves, according to David, and maybe some more layers since I'm gonna have to endure the cold. Well, Mahia says, "How do you run the Tone Secret as an always-on pedal?" Well, I guess I could show you. Let's see. I have it on my board right now. All right, I'm going to turn off my mic so I can play it a little bit. But this is kind of everything just at noon, and I'll turn it off as well so you can kind of hear it both ways. So it sounds good to me to kind of like beef up the clean tone. And I would say, right now I'm running it into a sur-reactive load, which has a tendency to put a little bit more gain, I think, on the signal than would be there. Because I don't have it run that distorted right now. But it seems to just kind of bring... to kind of just bring like a tubier element. It seems to just bring more of like a tubier element to everything that's going on. And so I appreciate that about it. It kind of just adds like a fatness, and you can kind of set it where it feels like it's subtle enough where you could just kind of just leave it on and bring in other stuff, and it wouldn't really feel like it was there, but you'd notice it if it wasn't. I love it. It's a great pedal, and I feel like even I have slept on it, so it maybe is worth it doing a little video to remind people about what makes the Tone Secret great. David says it's cold. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm just they don't sell cold weather gear like that here. I'm just gonna have to wear like 30 all my shirts. I won't have anything in my suitcase. It'll just all be on. Well, hopefully the place that I'm staying has got good heat. Anything else that people are thinking about? Things that are on your mind? Cool. Well, anybody that's coming to this late, we did talk about our new buffer interfaces. I had to put my Vertex Boost back on there because otherwise I had a missing pedal in my pedal board, so it wouldn't pass signal. But that is also coming out shortly. I hope you dig this about the boosts. If you have any questions as you watch this, you want to put that in the comments, please do. We'll get to that as soon as we can. And have a great weekend. Wish me luck on our trip, or on my trip to Chicago, and that it doesn't stay too cold. All right, guys, have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you soon. Yeah. And you need it. You need the tone secret. Everybody needs it. See you guys.